So today's session, we're really going to be focusing on how owned media is changing and what that means for the PR community, for PR professionals. Where we find ourselves right now is that we're at a place where search was rewarding visibility, and now it's very much rewarding authority. Now, that is actually, as we'll explain a little bit later, really good for PR because we're in a really great position to deliver on that. But it does take, obviously, a lot of change. We are seeing across the board with our clients, but also in general, that PR teams are somewhat losing some traffic, attribution, and leverage, even when we're doing everything right. So, how can we pivot? How can we change the game a little bit so that we see these numbers start to rise again? So this session is about rebuilding authority. It's not about hacks or shortcuts that boost vanity metrics. So what has changed? Search doesn't find your content anymore. It very much is designed to make decisions on what gets repeated. So SEO, where we've come from, asks, can your content be found? In GEO, so generative search, can your content be used? And these are really, really important differences because whilst there is a lot of crossover on these questions in terms of application, they have very different things that we need to be optimizing for, and they have very different approaches overall. I just want to really quickly run through a little glossary of terms just to make sure we're all on the same page of what we're talking about. I'm sure you all know SEO, so how you structure content so search engines can find and rank it. We've got GEO, or in some countries AEO, which is essentially generative search. And this is how you shape content so AI tools can understand it, summarize it, and reuse it. A citation is when AI or search engines are referencing your content. The prompt is obviously what someone's typing in to get that kind of answers, or in some cases, the instruction that they're giving to get something out of that AI system. Schema markup, if none of you have heard of that, we will jump into it in a bit more detail later, but essentially it's a behind the scenes piece of code that tells the machine exactly what your content means. It can be a little bit of a cheat code, but we'll get into why it needs to be treated with a little bit of caution. And then authority, which is how credible and trustworthy your brand looks to not just humans, but also to AI. Okay, so this playbook is going to be broken up into three pillars. What is owned media in 2026? The 6 mechanics of GEO, and then a conversation with marketing where we'll invite Tice and we will see what that overlap between marketing and PR. So let's get started with what is owned media in 2026. So owned media, and Tice, if you want to jump in here, I know this is definitely your area of expertise, but we've got paid, earned, and owned. And obviously we are talking about owned today. So online newsroom, press releases, brand blog, social media channels, and media kits. It gives you full editorial control. It has a long shelf life and it's reusable across a lot of different channels. Anything to add there, Tice?
If you look at the differences in these different categories, it's mostly that owned media kind of determines what story you're telling, whereas like earned and owned is more about where this story ends up and who reads it. The way we kind of advise our users and our customers and on these topics is that we say, if you don't have your own story straight and you don't have a consistent brand narrative on your own channels, your paid and earned channels will only spread confusion. And especially now in the age where an LLM sits between you and the audience.
Owned media is our baseline. It is the thing that we're going to focus on today about giving authority and really building that baseline. Earned, still really important. Paid in the right scenarios, still incredibly important. But today we'll be very much focusing on newsroom, press releases, your brand blog, and those sorts of things that have the high control with the lasting visibility. So newsrooms, and we're going to be really focusing on newsrooms today, but they are your owned media hub. They are your single source of truth. So they need to be easy to navigate with clear leads, regular relevant content, key assets, super prominent, evergreen content mixed in. AI is a very big fan of evergreen content, and clear contact points. So who owns these different areas? Who owns these different pieces of writing? What it's not, and what we cannot treat it as in this current makeup, is an archive. So PDFs, we'll get into why PDFs are basically a no-go for AI. Buried leads, isolated releases, and unclear navigation. These are all things that are going to ultimately affect your authority and drag down your ability to be cited by AI. We have a quick look here of sort of like what a really well set up newsroom could look like if we're talking about that source of truth. So it's easy to navigate. You can see here, you've got your top stories really, really clearly marked. You've got regular content, stuff that's coming out once, twice, 3 times a month. You've got really clear contact points. You've got evergreen content up there. So a year in review, biggest achievements in 2025. That's a piece that can be pulled from over a long period of time, potentially. And then you can see up the top in the navigation, you've got key assets really, really clearly marked and easy to navigate. So let's really look at the meat of this, the 6 mechanics of GEO. And these are them. So structure versus storytelling, explicit ownership and attribution, reusability over rankings, internal linking and how that is essentially authority mapping for AI, HTML first publishing, and then machine readable signals. So let's start with structure versus storytelling. AI doesn't read like humans. It scans for clarity. And so authority basically comes down to a certain extent, how fast meaning becomes obvious for AI. And to a certain extent, that can be true for humans. We want to know the meaning of something quite quickly, but AI especially is very much scanning for that clarity. I'm not saying here that storytelling isn't important. Storytelling is absolutely important. But if you want AI to cite your releases, to cite your content, it's about balancing that structure and that storytelling. So there are a few things that we very much recommend. A summary at the top, so like a too long don't read, or a few sort of key points that give AI a really quick understanding what's in here, what are the things that are coming out of here. That's super important. That inverted pyramid structure, so key facts first, headings that answer real questions. So we're talking about sections that very, very clearly state what is going to be in them. This can be difficult if you're wanting to sort of really create a style and sort of like a human intrigue element to your piece, because you really have to balance that with making also it very clear what the user is going to get out of a section of content. And then a really important one that AI really thrives on are sections that stand alone. So could you pull out each section of, let's say, a press release and put it over here without any context, and would it still be able to totally make sense? Because if you imagine AI scanning through your piece of content and just pulling out a little block and popping it somewhere, if that only makes sense with a whole bunch of extra content, either it's going to cite it and there's going to be a whole bunch of missing context and then it could be really easily misunderstood, or it's just not going to cite it at all because it's not possible to ascertain meaning from these contextless blocks. So when it comes to AI, it's really about how fast does that meaning become obvious. And we can see here, this is a little bit around authority beating reach. So we've said here structure versus storytelling. If we can get that authority from how fast the meaning becomes obvious, it means that that authority can actually outperform standard SEO reach. So if we see here, this AI overview here is sourcing this answer, you can see from the little logo here, from company X's website in this example. But if you scroll down here, you'll see that these 2 top organic search results are not company X's website. So even though these 2 are ranking better organically, they're ranking better from SEO, the actual answer that AI is giving, which is showing up right on top, is actually pulling from company X's website directly because it has deemed that is the strongest authority signal. Okay, the next one I want to touch on is explicit ownership and attribution. It's really all about AI being able to know exactly who is speaking whenever it's quoting. So that's talking about things like organization named in every single story that you have, a spokesperson always attached to quotes, really clear publish dates, and also if an article is updated after the fact, an additional, updated on this date, and clear authorship. And the reason all of these different things are pretty important is because obviously, first of all, with the dates and also the updated dates, AI tends to disregard things the older they become. So if you are updating something and you don't state that it's been updated, AI may disregard it because it will believe it's old. And then in terms of having the organization named and having the spokesperson attached to these different quotes, if you miss this, AI is just potentially, as I said before, either going to cite it, but without a connection to your company or without a connection to the right spokesperson, or it's not going to cite it at all because it deems that it's not authoritative enough. Okay, reusability over rankings. Essentially, what I mean is that you need to assume that every article is the reader's first interaction with your company. And by reader, in this case, I am a little bit more talking about AI. I am also talking about people. I am a personal advocate that you should just sort of always put your best foot forward and always assume that, yeah, the first interaction is that piece of content that you're putting out. But what that essentially means is plain language. So not a whole bunch of implied context, not a whole bunch of lore about your company that you have to have read the last 16 blog posts to understand. Facts that stand alone. So structuring facts in such a way that they could be pulled out of the article and cited, and it still makes total sense. And the reader, person who's sees this come up in an AI summary, understands the context of that without having to go searching for more. Bullets for key points. So if you are wanting to list a bunch of achievements or initiatives that your company is taking, rather than writing a really beautifully structured paragraph, maybe it's a smaller paragraph that introduces it in a really nice narrative way, but then it's a set of bullet points that really goes into depth of what all of those things are. So AI can basically go tick, 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 fantastic. I'll just cut that and I'll put that piece in the citation. And then FAQs for common questions is a huge one. At the bottom of your article, basically just having it's almost like a quick summary of all of the most important things that your article has answered and having that as an FAQ section at the bottom. Think in extractable blocks and not necessarily narrative arcs. I know that can be a little bit of a difficult concept when we like to write in narrative arcs as PR people, but if you can sort of balance both, then that is the sweet spot. Remember, SEO asks, can this rank? Whereas GEO asks, can this be reused? Internal linking. This is the big one for PR. Almost no one does it properly because I think there's a lot of confusion around it. But essentially, you're wanting to, every time you publish, you're wanting to go through those different pieces of content and see where are the opportunities to link to other pieces of my site, to other pieces of content, to create this sort of connected map. And that is not just every time you publish, but also then going back. So if you're linking out to a piece, seeing can you relink that piece now to your new piece. So creating this kind of, little knowledge hub and not just a static filing cabinet. The more you can do this, the more that was a couple of different benefits. But one is that it obviously allows people to explore your content in more sort of rich depth. But also AI can see how your strategy is tied to your product and it's tied to your leadership, and that builds your authority. It becomes, the newsroom goes from being a filing cabinet to an interconnected hub, and that is really what we want. HTML first publishing. So in GEO, PDFs are dead weight. AI doesn't read them. So if you are putting PDFs up for anything, they should really only be used as supporting assets. So if it's an extra, a downloadable checklist or the full terms and conditions of something, sure, fine, great supporting piece of content. However, if you are hiding important information in that PDF, it's not going to be crawlable, which means that AI can't reuse it. And if it can't reuse it, it won't cite it. So really keep that in mind. PDFs, dead weight. The only thing that they are helpful for is as supporting content. Keep everything that's important native web. And then finally, our last mechanic, number 6, is machine-readable signals. Metadata is a really important one. Headlines and dates, which we sort of covered. So make sure that you are setting up your content with your H1s, your H2s, your H3s in all the right places, getting your dates correct, linking out to your relevant facts, your author and your organizational metadata. That's all standard SEO stuff to some extent. But news article schema is basically a little bit of a cheat sheet for AI. If the content isn't following all of these other rules, schema won't save you, but it can give you an extra sort of boost if you are adding it on top of an already optimized piece. With that section, it is time to have a little quick conversation with you. For Pillar 3, a conversation with marketing. So Tice, you're head of marketing and PR at PressPage. You get to balance 2 pretty important roles, which I think makes you the perfect person to answer, why does marketing want more PR territory at the moment? What are we seeing change in this area?
Yeah, so personally, I find this a super interesting trend, and I've spoken to a lot of people in the industry about this as well. What we are seeing basically is that there's this, what people call the PR land grab going on. So marketeers are trying to own more what is traditionally seen as PR responsibilities or PR types of content. And the main reason for that is that basically marketing channels have become in the last decade or so a lot less predictable in terms of what they bring you as a company. And this has multiple reasons, but the three main ones that I believe are at the core of this is, well, one, and we talked about this briefly, is LLMs are now sitting in between you and your audience. So where you're like McKinsey did this report a while back where they saw that most companies lost about 20 to 50% of their website traffic because LLMs started being kind of the interpreter between you and your audience, or your brand and your audience. That means that it directly influenced what information people saw, how they saw it, but this often was even like in how it was framed, but this often kind of happened even without a click, right? You couldn't really track this. And yeah, I think that's a super interesting development, but that of course made a lot of marketeers very nervous, not in their sphere of influence anymore. So yeah. And then the second point is basically that performance marketing is under heavy pressure. So there's really high competition across social channels and also non-social channels like Google, but to fight for the right keywords, to fight for the right clicks. And yeah, it has just become a lot more expensive to reach, let's say, 1,000 people on a social channel with an ad than it used to be. So, and also people have this kind of this ad fatigue. So they're less likely to click on your ads. So it just being less of a logical business case to invest in paid media than it was maybe 10 years ago. Yeah, so that's the second one. And the third one is also what we just talked briefly about, is the organic side of things. So where we used to be able to write subpar content and then get away with hacking our way through structural changes, keyword stuffing and whatnot. Right now it was already getting more about relevance within SEO, and now with LLMs, it's becoming more and more about that. It just doesn't the getting attention on whatever you're doing, like your brand, your product, your campaign, like getting attention is just become a lot harder. Funnily enough, what marketeers have identified as the solution are things that are basically content that is really high authority, super relevant, informational rather than commercial, and usually like function over forms, better structure, clear, to the point. Yeah, and that sounds to me exactly like PR content. So it's about your press releases and your media coverage and your industry reports and your thought leadership articles. So typical PR content. And I think that's the main reason why marketeers have been moving in that direction.
Okay. So what does marketing do differently from PR? What is marketing optimizing for that PR doesn't need to touch? What are the sort of like, where do we choose our battles to a certain extent?
Yeah, good question. So I personally, I think that when digital marketing came up, marketing was all about like, if it wasn't measured, it didn't really happen. And I think it's basically how marketing earned their budgets, how they earned influence in the company, how they got a seat at most boardrooms. But the reality of any buying journey, even the shorter, simpler ones, is that there's a lot of touch points that are not measured or that are harder to quantify, and these buying journeys are usually not really linear. So yeah, there's just a lot of touch points that are influenced and don't really show up clearly in attribution models. And I think that is exactly the kind of spot where PR comes in. So where I see marketing being more short-term, more commercially oriented, I think PR is all about how do you build trust, how do you build a reputation, how do you build credibility, and in some extent also awareness around your brand that then helps reduce acquisition costs or speeds up sales cycles or increases word of mouth and referrals. So these things are just harder to measure, doesn't make them less important. So I see there a really clear split, to be honest. And I think the opportunity is really for PR to play a more measurable role in this long-term commercial strategy around awareness, trust, credibility. But also at the same time, we do need to measure things. We do need to prove that we are having this impact. So at the same time, also taking more ownership on that front. Yeah, that's, I think, where the sweet spot is for PR compared to marketing.
Yeah. Okay, clear. And then one more question for you. So where does PR bring value that marketing cannot replace? So we've established there is some land grab, as you said. What are the things that marketing's just never going to be able to get right compared to PR professionals?
I do think a lot of marketeers are also good at writing thought leadership and thinking this like, or creating relevant content or building brands. But it's at the same time, I do think there's a spot for PR where it's about building this kind of unique value around a brand and around a reputation. And that's more around the getting third-party credibility, for example, through earned media, or protecting authority in a high-stakes moment, like a crisis or a critical communication moment around an M&A or whatever is on your kind of like agenda. Strategically positioning executives for investor trust or other reasons. And then most important of all is just your brand narrative. Like I said, it's usually different departments looking for short-term or longer term, or some people looking at how to make people click on an ad and then buy a product, whereas other departments look at how to build up this super intangible thing around a brand that we call trust, that then influences those things like your acquisition cost or your speed of conversion. So I think, where does PR bring value? In a lot of different ways, but I think both bring a lot of value. I just feel we need to set them closer together to make sure that we kind of balance these two things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in terms of opening up a dialogue with your marketing colleagues, I think that can be a really valuable thing to figure out where is there synergies, where is there moments to collaborate on things. And also I think to share insights, because I think different, like PR is learning particular insights around AI and around GEO and around owned media, and marketing is learning slightly different insights. So the more I think that those two can connect, the bigger and better of a picture you're going to get.
Yeah, for sure. And we see this as well at Presspage, like our users and the companies we work with, we do see that these lines are blurring a little bit and people do start to work more together, basically, where it used to be more separated. So I think that's a very positive thing. But at the same time, PR has, when marketing claimed the seat at the boardroom and then started proving their return on ad spend, those kind of metrics, so their impact on real pipeline, that didn't happen as much for PR. So I think this is also the moment where PR content is becoming more relevant. There is more willingness to invest long-term in these kind of commercial strategies. So it's also the moment to step up and to show that this is what we own as a PR team and a corporate communications team, and we can we can kind of take the lead here. And I think that's a really cool opportunity.
Totally. I think people sometimes forget how important it can be to internally sell yourself as a department, to really provide and prove the value that you bring to the table. And as you said, marketing, I think historically has been better at this. They are marketing for a reason. But I think there's a lot of room for PR, as you said, to really claim this sort of space. Okay, so wrapping things up. We've got a little checklist here. So the owned media checklist for 2026, clear summaries, explicit ownership, reusable structure, connected stories, and then machine-readable basics. So you can really start using this, looking at your existing content, looking at your upcoming content, and seeing how you can really get back that authority and sort of regain control of your owned media ecosystem. Thank you all so much for joining. As I said, my name is Jesse Finn. This has been Tice. Thanks to everyone. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.